Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Priya Agarwal, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Paper. For those of you that might not be familiar with the company, Paper partners with K-12 schools throughout North America to give students an equal opportunity to excel academically. Our educational support system provides learners with unlimited 24/7 homework help, providing feedback and study support. Our specialized tutors deliver on-demand, one-to-one academic support in 4 languages across more than 200 academic subjects. So students always have access to expert help exactly when, where, and how they need it. As part of the For Teachers by Teachers discussion series, we're really excited to bring together educators tonight to share insights on how you can take charge of your tech-infused classrooms. Today's panel will be sharing their firsthand experience on how they plan for and conduct instruction in the toggled term, managing various learning scenarios across virtual, hybrid, and in-person. For the conversation tonight, I'm very excited to bring together Becky Colling from Santa Clarita, California. Hi, Becky. Dr. Hugo Sierra from Fontana, California. Hi, Dr. Hugo. And Stephanie Rothstein from Los Gatos, California. Hi, Steph. The discussion tonight is going to be moderated by Matt Rhoads, a teacher, education specialist, lecturer, and author. Before I hand over to Matt to kick off the discussion, just a couple of logistics for today. All of the attendees are in listen-only mode. However, we really do encourage you to join the discussion by submitting your thoughts or questions through the chat feature in Zoom. And without further delay, please welcome Matt and the panelists for tonight. Matt, over to you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. This is just such a exciting and scary discussion because in California, for example, and many states across the country, we've been moving between various educational settings throughout this school year, beginning in the fall and moving into the spring, and going through all these different types of environments, toggling between online, blended hybrid scenarios, as well as concurrent/high flex. And we're going to discuss a little bit what these are and how they're implemented in school sites. And when I talk about the toggle term, that's just essentially just switching between each of these types of instructional settings. And because of COVID and different types of outbreaks, schools have had to move between each of these settings throughout the school year. And it's been a challenge not only for teachers, but leaders as well as the community. Tonight, we're going to be talking about a number of strategies to help teachers and schools navigate these instructional settings so that we can support students and teachers as well, to provide them with good opportunities to learn and to make the experience something that is going to be worthwhile for students. And we're going to be really focusing tonight on some strategies within blended learning and concurrent and high flex. So we'll talk about those. I'm going to first talk a little bit about these different types of instructional settings. I described them in my upcoming book, Navigating the Toggle Term, a guide to K-12 classroom and school leaders. So hybrid, for example, also blended learning. There's so much that goes into this, is that sometimes there's students coming in every other day, one time a week, and they're online. Or it could be you have students in person and online at the same time, live, and that's called concurrent, but that also falls under blended learning. So there's a lot of different instructional models that go into blended learning. I've heard of flipped classroom, station rotation, flex, 4 out. There's tons of different models that fall into it, and they're all adaptable. And I think that by the end of this conversation, you're going to have a number of strategies to help you implement these within your classroom and school. And everyone on this panel has experience with navigating these instructional models, but also they have a lot of experience in educational technology and integrating instructional strategies with the tech to help amplify learning. So let me introduce the panel. They're going to discuss their context in education, a little bit about themselves. So first we'll have Becky Colling go first.
Hey everyone, my name is Becky Colling. I am an instructional coach. I am also a co-host for the 3CC's podcast. I am a trainer, and because one of my amazing professors I know is listening, I'm also considering getting my doctorate and an aspiring author. So I know she's listening for that. Yes, I see you in the chat. I am at an elementary only district. So I think the only one on tonight that's elementary only district. We have 10 schools, and this year, because of the switch, we actually have 10 schools that are hybrid right now, and they are TK through 6. Half the students come in the morning, half the students come in the afternoon, and then virtually they're just doing science and social studies, PE, and art. And then we have 3 digital learning academies. Those are students who have signed up to be digital all year. They will not be coming back face-to-face this school year. And so combined 13 schools, 3 digital, 10 hybrid as of like a week and a half ago.
Yeah, there's so much change. And I think that that's just one thing that teachers and school leaders have had to work through. And that's going to be something that you're going to see as a theme throughout this panel. So let's go with Stephanie Rothstein. Can you give a little bit of background about yourself?
Happy to. Hi, everyone. I am Stephanie Rothstein. I am from Northern California. I'm an instructional coach, a mentor, a speaker, a writer. I've written lots of articles this year. I've had the pleasure to do that, I should say. And a little background, I'm a Google innovator, a trainer, and a coach. I got my admin certification, which I think gives me a lens. I'm in the classroom, but I also am stepping into moving towards leadership in my district. So there's a lot of different pieces that I am seeing of parts of this puzzle. I am in a high school only district, and I also chair the design thinking pathway that is part of that district. So we have 2 high schools, and we have been virtual for the last year since March. We are in the process right now. Yesterday was our first day where staff returned to campus officially, and we are holding Wednesdays as the day that staff are coming back for the next few Wednesdays. And then students return for those Wednesdays. We're going to do kind of 2, a slow phased in return starting March 24th and then the 31st. Then we go to spring break, and then following spring break, we're in 2 cohorts, essentially a cohort A and B. And whichever cohort you're in is coming on Monday and Tuesday, or Thursday and Friday, and the days that you are not on campus, you're simulcasting. And then Wednesday is saved as an asynchronous day. So I'm excited to talk to everyone and see what people are doing and learn from everyone as we are phasing into this process ourselves right now. And my job is to support teachers throughout that process.
Thank you, Steph. I appreciate that. It's definitely just interesting how you've been in that design phase and looking at it from multiple lenses. So your perspective is going to be great tonight to listen to. So now we have Dr. Hugo Sierra. Give us a little bit about your background and context.
Sure. Thanks, Matt. Okay, so I am Hugo Sierra. I'm a teacher, I'm a mentor, and I am a PD presenter for the Fontana School District. If you guys do not know where Fontana is, where all the crazy winds occur, over there. We are a TK through 12th grade school district. We have been on distance learning ever since last March. The school board just proposed a group A, B, and C, kind of like a cohort that we will start on the week after spring break. So very similar to Stephanie, we will have the group A that will come in Monday and Tuesday. Group B will be there Thursdays and Fridays, but group C, those kids will stay online for the entire time. So the school district proposed that we begin with TK through 2nd grade on the 5th of next month on April. And then the following week, we will go on through 3rd and 5th grade. There is no word right now on secondary schools. And then last but not least, we are a Microsoft Teams school district.
Thank you, Hugo. I appreciate that. Yeah, so we have a lot of different backgrounds here. And then my background in my district right now is that we are currently moving towards an A-B cohort hybrid where you have an A day and a B day, and then students attend that specific day that they're assigned. That's for secondary, and we're supposed to start that March 23rd. But for example, our primary grades have they started in October, a hybrid schedule, an A and B schedule, but we were closed. The physical sites were closed in November due to COVID outbreaks and just the positivity level in our county. And then in January, they returned to hybrid, as well as middle school was also in the fall, but they had to close those physical locations. But for elementary at least, they've started that hybrid again in secondary. It's hoping to return the 23rd. So they essentially toggled multiple times between hybrid and online. And I know that that has been a major trend in the United States. And if you're interested in looking at all of those trends in terms of schools and districts toggling to various educational settings, I put a link in the chat that shows every single district in the United States and the teaching model used throughout the school year, and there's real time. I mentioned that in my upcoming book, and my background really is I've been researching these instructional models for the last year. Ever since COVID started, I began researching blended learning and essentially what are some best practices based on the research over the last 20 years of teaching in online and in-person settings with that digital blend occurring throughout the school week. So let's get started with the questions. We have a number of them tonight. Our first question is, I'm going to put this in the chat as well. What are your best tips for managing synchronous learning when you have both remote and in-person students? So this is called the concurrent model or high flex. So go ahead, Steph, let's see your perspective on this.
I am so excited actually to hear everybody's perspective on this. It is the question that we are getting most often from our teachers as we are working on our own return. We are currently working on even creating videos and live instruction demonstrations to show to some of our staff. And when I think about this, there's so much that goes into it. So there's the physical layout of your space, along with the specific way that you're going to be doing the setup. And so it is really hard to separate all of those things. And when we think about managing it, when I am talking to other instructors, those are the pieces that they start to think about is, okay, what is it physically going to look like? How do I have the desk situated? Where am I going in the room? How am I maneuvering? Am I able to move back and forth? What do I do? And so we've started to look at what are the different setups that will help depending on your situation. And then some of the key components that we think would kind of apply universally to help support those educators. And so some of those universal supports that we have found for our staff have been, the first one is the use of student jobs. You could even have that also be volunteers in the classroom. So we are looking as a district at recruiting volunteers to be the people that help run the chat for the virtual space while the teacher is doing the teaching in the classroom and managing discussions. And so that has been a piece that after talking to many districts about how they manage that, that was a piece that they highly recommended if it was possible to do. The other things that I am a huge proponent of are having a very similar routine. It doesn't mean that what you do is stagnant, but having a routine in terms of how long you usually take for your introduction and following a particular agenda will help to calm both the people in person and those at home. And so having something that they can follow along with. So a clear agenda and a process with protocols. So by protocols, I mean an understanding of how do the people at home chime in when they want to say something? Is there a particular way that they do that? How do we interact? How do students interact with other students that are at home? And so figuring those kinds of what are your routines in a space that maybe hasn't been your normal before, I think is a good place to start. The other big tip for us was thinking about how to partner students or match them up in groupings with some in person and some at home, so that we really can have some cross connection, and then understanding the technology that you have and practicing with it. In terms of the specific jobs that I recommend, there was an article that I wrote about it, so I'm going to put the link in the chat, and it was written back in May, but it was all about reflection and how to think about the 5 different jobs that would be really useful to you, and it could work for virtual or synchronous live with having people at home as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think those jobs that students have, monitoring the chat, then those in-person jobs as well in the classroom to facilitate that classroom culture and have that collaboration piece is huge. So that's some really good first steps when thinking about that concurrent instruction. So Hugo, what are your thoughts about this?
Okay, so I believe it starts with teachers feeling safe that they will be back. Our school district has been doing an amazing job. So in every single school site, in the classroom, there is an A and a B desk. So when we have our kids back, the group A students will be sitting on only the group A desk, and then the group B students will be sitting on the group B desk. So, and then the school district has done an amazing job from sanitizing all these products that they have, just to filling the support for us at, with the teachers. In terms of the best tips, I believe as a teacher, you just need to have 3 things that has been working so well with you and go on from there. I believe, since we are a Microsoft school, I just use a lot of breakout rooms. And I think that is one of the things that I will continue to actually do. Especially you could have the breakout rooms of the kids that are in person with you, with the kids that are at home as well. And then also the use of whiteboard FI. I don't know if you guys have used it, but that has been amazing. As a math teacher, oh my goodness, that has saved me a lot. And that's one of the things that I will continue with it, because I could see the progress of the kid right there on the spot. So when we go back to school, the kids that are there with me on campus, they could actually use a whiteboard, while the rest of the students, I could see their work on the whiteboard FI. That is amazing. But I believe the best tips is to start off with 3 things that has worked with you, and then you need to build on that for sure.
No, definitely. I love the whiteboard FI. As you can see every student's response, whether they're in person or they're at home, and you can have that conversation within breakout rooms. That's huge. So when we're thinking about this idea of concurrent synchronous learning, I always think that this is what I call it concurrent light or high flex light. So essentially, I like to start the class with, for example, if you have everyone together, you can do it synchronously for about 20 minutes. Bring it together, have that warm-up activity, make sure the agenda is all set, and then basically ensure that everyone's on the same page. And then when we move to asynchronous, the asynchronous students at home are going to be doing a different task than the students that are in person with me. Maybe in person, we'll have that conversation in class about that topic that we're working on, that math topic, or for an ELA or history, we can focus on those topics. And that collaboration and discussion is trying to get that talking and articulation going in person. Then maybe the students that are asynchronous at home, they're doing some sort of like video lecture, like on Edpuzzle, or they're doing a Padlet, or they're doing something that maybe it's practice activity. They're doing something of that nature. But then we come back synchronously at the end of class, that end time, where they could be doing an exit slip, or they could be summarizing their learning, or they could be doing an online discussion board. So you have that synchronous piece there as well. So some of the last few things I have is trying to keep the instruction short when you're concurrent, or even when you're online in general. Chunk it, make sure your instruction's 5 minutes or less. Try and create collaborative opportunities where you can have students online and in person work together in some way, somehow. And like Hugo said, I think the breakout rooms are a great opportunity for ensuring students can still communicate with each other, whether they are at home or whether they're in the school building. So I want to transition. So our next question really is talking about these different types of instructional models in blended learning, like flipped classroom, station rotation. We just discussed the concurrent synchronous model. So I'm going to put that question in right here. And Hugo, you go first. Tell us one of these instructional models you were thinking of.
Okay, so the 3 station rotations, that is a must. I believe that's one of the most effective things that I have used that has worked with my students. When I talk about 3 station, I mean that there is something that the students are doing every single in. So the first one is the direct teaching. That is when me as a teacher are teaching the actual kids. If it's a math lesson, if it's an English lesson, a science lesson, but that's when the direct occurs. The second station is when the students are either working on something, if it's on a video, on a reteaching stuff, or an actual project. So that is the other part of it. And then the third one is the independent work. During this time that the kids actually work on their own, if it's practicing an essay, writing sentences, that is the other piece. Now, in our school district, our classes right now are 1 hour and 20 minutes. This works in about 25 minutes per each. So 25 minutes for the first one, 25 minutes for the next one, and then 25 minutes. Now, there are some times that 20 minutes will be the best case. That way you could have some time at the very end to close up the entire class. And then I'm going to provide you some links to some amazing things. One of the things is Flipgrid. Flipgrid has been amazing. Students create their own videos. And you know what? If you give the kids about 15 minutes just to create a video on anything, you are going to get a lot of responses back. Something else that our school district has used is Nearpod. I love that because it is teacher self-paced. In addition, you could also do the student pace. And I love that. And I believe that these 3 different stations are going to be ideal. Super, super helpful. So I'm just going to add these stuffs in there in the chat box so you guys could see right now.
Awesome. Station rotation is definitely, I think, one of my favorite instructional models within blended learning, as I call them asynchronous playlists, which students can use where, for example, they start off on iReady adaptive learning. Maybe you want to work on that individual differentiation on skills, and then moving into an activity where maybe it's a collaborative activity or it's something that they're learning new. Maybe it's a self-paced Nearpod lesson or Pear Deck. And then finally, at the very end, it could be that whole group activity where you're synchronous, or you could have a reflection. It can be station rotation, doesn't need to be synchronous or asynchronous. It can be both, or it could be one or the other. It just depends on how you want to do it. And I think just the most important thing when we're thinking about these different types of instructional models like station rotation, flipped classroom is where you front load a lot of the material beforehand, asynchronously at home, and then focusing more on that discussion piece synchronously, is that we need to be intentional for what our students work best with. Maybe certain groups of students work better in that flipped classroom model versus the station rotation model, and think about the grade level and think about their, different types of abilities. And we have to also think about routines around these different types of instructional models. Think less is more. The routines will take time for them to learn. So don't try and implement everything all at once. Do it step by step by step when you're thinking about implementing these blended learning models in your classroom. I know Becky has a number of ideas regarding station rotation, so go ahead and share those.
Yeah, I'm going to throw in the chat quickly just a way of setting up your classroom. One thing we always talk about when we do station rotation is, first off, how are we going to set up that classroom space so that way students are able to actually engage in that station rotation. The second thing that usually comes up is, what is the purpose behind the stations? Is it that you want students to be and I'm going to say this, I'm elementary, so very honest, is it that you want students to be quiet so you can work with a small group? That happens a lot. We set students up on Dreambox or Raz Kids because we just need them to stay quiet while we're working with the rest of our students. So what I like to do is ask teachers, what could we do to actually enhance the learning? And instead of just finding things to make students quiet, find things that are going to engage students, or set up your room so that students could be working in a small group and they could be supporting each other that way. And it's not going to disrupt your small group that you have going on. Having those roles and norms, all of that's going to come into play. But when we're bringing in that technology, we do need to make sure that we have those norms in place, especially for our younger students. And a lot of it comes down to how are we setting up that room so that way our students can easily go from station to station. Or right now, we need our students to face one direction. We need our students to be 4 to 6 feet apart now. It's changed. And so how do we make this happen? I put it in that image. It might be that you have students stay in their little pod and you as the teacher are moving from station to station. So there's different ways to make it work. That's one example. And I love all of the ideas that Hugo was sharing out because I think that they're really engaging for our kids to get them in Flipgrid, near pod. They don't have to be quiet. They need to be engaged.
No, definitely. I think that there's just so many different opportunities with blended learning. And I think just before we move on to like focusing more a little bit on how we can manage these blended learning environments, having students located in and whether they're at home or in person, is that just know that with these blended learning instructional models, if we, for example, are in person and online, and then we have to toggle back to online, we can use the same model essentially online. So a flipped classroom model can work online. Station rotation model can work online as well. So just know that these blended learning models, once they're implemented, whether you're doing that in person and online hybrid, is that if things change, then you don't have to essentially reinvent the wheel, because if you have those routines in place, you can basically adjust those to that online scheduling at that point. So just know that these are very much so adaptable to whether we are fully in person, hybrid, or online. So let's talk about now. It's a difficult to manage students in these environments, whether they're at home and at school. How do we manage knowing that they're engaged, or making sure that they're on the correct website or tool, or just really making sure that they're on the same page as you? Because I can only imagine just keeping track of things that are going on in front of you versus digitally at home, especially if you're in that concurrent model where they're both live at the same time. So I know Becky has a number of ideas, so go ahead.
So I will say we are fortunate. We are not doing concurrent in my district, but these could work for both. So one thing that we have in our district is we utilize Clever as that single sign-on for our students. It makes it so that, you know, our students, they're as young as 4 or 5 years old, aren't having to remember all of these passwords. So we can ensure that they're able to get to the resources they need with that one sign-on mode. That's super helpful. And then we utilize the less is more, which was talked about earlier, the less is more model. When it comes to using tools with students, we want to use fewer tools and make sure our students know how to use those tools in depth to their full capacity, as opposed to throwing out there multiple different tools. In my role, sorry about that, in my role as an instructional coach, I support teachers in making sure they understand how to utilize those tools to their full capacity. I put in there an example of an approved resource list for teachers. One of the biggest things we run across is it COPA compliant? And so Steph and Hugo and Matt, I know this isn't a concern in high schools because COPA compliance is 13 and under. But it is a privacy act that we do have to follow. So if you are elementary, please keep that in mind. Not every resource is available to you. So having that list of resources that you can use that are safe for your students. In our district, we have an approval process. that allows students to, or allows teachers to go in and see what tools are available, what training is there for me, how can I better understand this tool so I can show it to my students and get my students to the point where they can actually start creating, utilizing things like Google Workspaces, all of the different components there, Edpuzzle, Flipgrid, Nearpod. We use a lot of Nearpod. And so just finding ways to use those tools in a meaningful way, but also making sure that they're safe for our students.
Definitely. That's a great perspective regarding the single login and being COPA compliant, especially for those younger ages. That's really important. And then I think it's just any district or school, they need to make sure that those are in check. And I think that also in terms of when we're thinking about managing these environments outside of just focusing on the students engaging in a specific tool, we need to make sure that they're on the right page. So there's tools like Blocksy, Classroom Relay, Go Guardian that allows us to see what page they're on their Chromebook or the device that they have issued. And what's great is that you can pop in links into your student's device and tell them to go to that specific location. You can freeze their screen if they're on the wrong location. You can keep track of your students that are asynchronous at home as well as in the classroom if they're on the devices, and you can make sure that they're where they need to be. You can record their screen. You can basically manage as much as you can and have control over using those types of tools. And that's a great way to manage your classroom, especially if you're that in concurrent, as also if you're really essentially hybrid where you have a group of kids asynchronously at home. You can see what they're doing, make sure that they are on top of what they need to do. You can send them direct messages through there and say, hey, you're doing the right thing. I want you to continue this. Or you can give them feedback that way as well. I think that there's a variety of different other tools. I think we just discussed those quite a bit. I think Padlet and Wakelet are awesome, where you can do those discussion boards. And I think that you can't really go wrong as long as everyone's ability to access the tool. I think Hugo has something as well about Microsoft Teams. Go ahead.
So with Teams, we can now control their screen. So if the students allowed us to control the screen, we could go in there with the mouse and we could control their screen. It's so cool. And then also for me on exam days, I have the students show their faces. If I do not see their face, I would assume that they're cheating, and I click the little button where it says end test, and that ends. So far I have had no students complain. So they know on test day to comb their hair, to put on their makeup, because they will show their faces on test days.
No, that's an awesome new thing on Microsoft Teams. I wasn't aware of that. So thanks for letting me know about that. That's a huge advantage versus some of the other platforms that are available. And also thinking about those like student cues and protocols is that you can, for example, have different types of paper that you could have your students hold up, or different types of hand movements as well, especially if you want to check for understanding, if it's something where they don't reply on like the video chat. So those are some other things that you can do as well. So let's move on to our final question tonight before we do our final roundtable of like 2 to 3 overall best tips that we suggest to teachers regarding moving between these various blended learning settings. So our last question tonight is, what strategies are you using for synchronous learning to maximize student learning? So let's get started with Becky for this question.
All right. So for synchronous learning, we really like to focus on discourse and inquiry when we're with the students, and opening it up for a lot of student talk and less teacher talk. And that can be challenging when you have students on the computer and trying to come off of mute. It does take a lot of practice for our littles, but it's doable, especially if you meet with smaller groups. Utilizing collaborative slides, so going into Google Slides, sharing those out with students and actually letting them all comment or add their pieces to the same slide deck is really helpful, because then as the teacher, you can showcase that either in a live meet or up on your smart board or whatever tool you have up on the front of the board to showcase it. We also utilize Jamboard a lot because and now Jamboard is going to have the version history, which is really nice. We can actually see who's doing what. But then you can pull that in, whether it's a quick check-in with students or to see their work as they're solving a math problem or as a quick formative assessment. And then we pull in, let's see, through Bridges, which is the curriculum we use, we've got the Math Learning Center apps. Those are really helpful for our kiddos to actually showcase their work. And then a great idea that was recently brought to me was to actually, even if you're meeting with students in person, have them sign into a Google Meet. So they might be sitting at the desk in front of you, have them sign into a Google Meet and then sign into that same Google Meet on your smartboard. And when a student wants to showcase their work in front of the class, or if they want to show you something right there, you can have them present their screen and then the whole class will see it on the smartboard or in front of them. So it's just easier for us to be able to share out without having to come up to the screen doing all of the movement that we would have previously done. So that one was a really good idea that was recently shared with me. As far as going asynchronous, this is time for students to practice on their own what we were learning about when we were together. So it's, if we follow the I do, we do, you do model, it's a lot of the you do time. And that can be anything from the Wakelets to the doc slides, Padlets, Flipgrids, all of those resources. It's really just continuing off of what happened synchronously.
Awesome. Yeah, those are some just amazing strategies. I mean, I think that inquiry, just being creative, and I love the basically the student sharing their work using Google Meet. That creates that agency for the students and, you know, probably boosts their confidence quite a bit. We all love sharing things and our students love doing that as well. So Steph, what are your thoughts about this? How can we maximize learning in these settings?
Oh my gosh, I have so many thoughts on this one. And I wanted to add something that Becky said, that piece about the Google Meet made me think about one thing that has shifted my practice and the practice of a lot of teachers at the school. So one of the things that we do is that we have the teachers are the people who they own the slide deck. And so whatever the slide deck is, and then they share that out with students, whether they're at home or in person. And that way, no one has to ever share for what's going on the screen. They get assigned a particular slide. But that has worked really well for us for sharing out. And I love that Google Meet idea. The other things I was thinking about is I'm thinking for our synchronous time for connection, we're really trying to think about what we want to do in terms of like making that time, since we haven't had it for a full year, how to make it special. So how to really have collaboration and connection and discussion and feedback and utilize student voice. And so one of the other components that we've had to really think about is that we've had to think about how to do this knowing that we're a little unsure about our bandwidth when we are on campus, to be honest with you. We haven't had people there in an entire year. Some of our students live in a mountainous region where their bandwidth isn't that great. And then, so we've had people coming to campus to have it, but we haven't had, I'm in a design thinking pathway where we are always using devices, but the rest of campus, we haven't ever had every single person on campus on a one-on-one device while in a room. There are some classrooms that were outfitted with computers. And so we're a little bit nervous about that. And so we've been trying to think about what to do if we can't have access to technology when people are live in person, and how to utilize that time best. And then, sorry about my daughter in the background. And then what to do also, one second, boo-boo. And then I'll pause for a second in a minute. And then what to do with the students that are at home at the same time. The other piece that I wanted to mention was that we really are thinking about being in a design thinking pathway, how to extend the learning. So really thinking about that time, that asynchronous time, as extension time. So we begin our project together in class, we're doing that synchronously, and then the asynchronous time is really about deepening that. And then the other piece, one last second, boo-boo, I'm on my last tip, I apologize, my youngest of three. The last tip is We utilize Scrum Board. So it's a way to visualize how you separate that out. I'll type out that in the chat so that you're not hearing her in the background. But a Scrum Board, essentially, how about you come sit on my lap while I'm doing this? A Scrum Board lets you map out, what you are thinking. Welcome to at-home teaching, right? Our Scrum Board lets you map out what you are thinking. And so you really are thinking about all of the pieces of your project development and when and at what point you might need help. So it's utilized a lot by engineers, but it is a protocol or a practice that could work in any environment. And so that is something that has really helped. And so it allows the student to then say, actually, now is when I need help. And it's a way to visually raise your hand when they need help in a process. And then I have some tips that I can share that are breakout tips from an article that I just wrote, really thinking about how to utilize all of those in the best way possible and make the most out of it. And thinking about doing things for really short bursts of time, we found have really worked well. So I'll put those tips in the chat.
Those are awesome. I mean, I love the idea of the Scrum Board and for project tracking, for project-based learning. I think that's an amazing strategy, and I'm going to think about implementing that for my next project. So that's going to round out the questions. But before we go, I want each panelist to give us their final 2 to 3 best overall tips for navigating this time in blended learning settings and navigating this toggle term. So we'll start with Dr. Sierra, then we'll go with Steph, and then we'll go with Becky. So go ahead, Hugo.
So the first tip that I'm going to give is put on the student cap first. What is the importance from the lesson that you want them to get? What I have done is that I send all my kids the templates for their math lessons for the whole entire year to their houses. So instead of wasting time going in one by one, they have the template. We just fill it out during the class. That saves a lot of time. Also, try out new things. Don't be afraid. Right now is a perfect time to try out these amazing tools. I did start with Teams. I was afraid at first. I'm like, let me try it out with Teams. From that, I went into the polls from Teams. I then went into the whiteboard, the Flipgrid, and all these amazing, but try out new things. If it doesn't work, try to see what part didn't work. And last but not least, make sure you take a break. For us, just being on the computer for the entire day is just too much. You know what? If at 3 o'clock comes around, turn off your computer. You guys need a break as well.
Definitely. Thank you, Hugo. I think that last bit of self-care tip is huge, especially for avoiding like burnout and just that Zoom fatigue. So let's go with Steph. Go ahead and give us your final thoughts.
Okay, happy to. So one of the tips that I put in the breakout article was about utilizing the gray space in Google Slides or Jamboard, that space around the outside. And we have found that that has been like a key component. You could put instructions around the outside. You could put little pictures depending on the age group of the students and what they need, and then they can drag things in as needed. I have found that has been super, super helpful. And so really trying to think about all the ways that students can take in information. So I think right now there's an overload. There's an overload. They've been looking at screens for a while. We're going to have them in person, but they're also going to be looking at stuff. Like they're going to be dealing with kids at home. So we have to think about what is going to provide the simplest way of providing instructions. If they don't hear it well when I say it, maybe I can give them cues. And so then when they go to present, if we're doing presenting of a particular slide and we go to present it, all those little cues are sitting around the outside and they're not taking over that particular slide. That has been a key for us, for me for sure. And then the other piece is just, I love, Hugo, I love your tip about thinking about it from a student perspective, because I really do think that that is the most important piece. I actually think as we are all moving, each of us anyway, are moving into being back in person, that the most important tip is remembering that connection is key and how can we build that connection. And so if that means that I'm going to take more time to actually get to know each and every person, I stood with my student teachers teacher, this is going to be the first time she sees people in person, the first time. Like, she's taught them all year in my class. And we talked about, how are you going to greet students at the door? How are you going to greet students when they're coming on online? And so we talked even about timing. So one of the tips I would think about is, if you're doing both, which we are, how much time are you spending standing outside that classroom? And then when do you come in to greet? And so one of the things that we said was, make a stand slide, like a slide, so that the students that are coming in, whether it's on Zoom or Meet or Teams, wherever you are, know that you're not just like, you haven't run away from them. You're like, your teacher will be back in 5 minutes. And it has a cute picture of you or a Bitmoji or some question that they can work on. So thinking about what can keep people connected, so that they don't feel left alone in whatever space they are, I think is key.
I love the connection and relationship piece, because I think moving from online to in person and going back and forth, it's a lot. And I think just getting to really know our students is going to be such it's gonna be a blessing for us as teachers too, just seeing them online at times, and when you don't get to see them, don't see their face all the time and interact with them, it's in a typical classroom setting. It's going to be great to see them. So Becky, what are your last final thoughts?
So I have 3 quick ones. One is flexibility. The next one is Tech Squad, and then learning objectives. So flexibility, be flexible with yourself. Keep it simple. Try on new things. As Hugo said, if they don't work, like, have a fail fest, fail forward, enjoy that moment, learn with your students, and be okay with it. Like, shouldn't work. I mean, not everything should work on the first try. So be flexible with yourself. And then as far as having a tech squad, this typically is easier when you're face to face, but if you can have students become the expert or teach each other about how to utilize a tool. And in Jenny McGeera's book on Courageous Adventures, she talks about, like, when you set up that tech squad in your classroom, teach your students, it's hands off. If you're part of the tech squad, you're not taking over the computer. You're going to walk them through. You're going to be patient. You're going to slowly, like, teach students how to use the tool. And don't be afraid to let your tech squad teach you. It's okay if students are teaching us how to use technology. Like, that's a celebration and a win in and of itself. And then the final one, learning objectives. With the tech squad, have assigned students, and you can rotate those throughout the year. But if you can have assigned students that are part of your tech squad, like, that's awesome and super helpful. Learning objectives, start with a learning objective. What do your students need to know? There are so many cool tools out there, but if I get stuck in the tools and just teaching new tools all the time, we're never going to actually get to the learning and the essential standards we need to focus on. So start with learning objectives. Those are my 3, and I'm going to throw them in the chat for you all.
The flexibility is so key. And I think also just an idea of being able to adapt, because things are changing so fast. And one of my last points is that with all these different instructional models and blended learning, just know that they can be adapted to any setting. So like I said earlier, if you've been online, and you can use the station rotation model online, you can use the flipped classroom in a hybrid setting. They're interchangeable. And that's what's so great about all these different types of models now, is that really there's no bounds to learning. It can take place anywhere. It's just an intentional design that you have for how you want your students to learn. And I think that the idea of flexibility and being able to adapt is key to those components. My last thing is think less is more. You don't have to be an expert. You only have to be good at a number of things that amplify student learning in a blended or online setting. So try not to, be super inventive at times. Just do things that you're really good at, and then try 1 or 2 new things once in a while and see how they go. You can always adapt and change as you go as well. And I think just lastly, just the notion of things aren't going to always go the way that you plan, but sometimes the way that they go may be something new and inventive that you didn't think about before. So the idea of failing forward, don't think of it as a failure. Think of it as just an idea that you're learning, and we're all learning here, whether we're the teacher, the school leader, or the student in this scenario. So thank you so much for everyone being here. We learned so much. I feel like every panelist learned from each other as well. And I hope that you guys all come back as an audience to our next panel, which will happen in April.
Thank you so much, Becky, Steph, Hugo, Matt. I mean, this was absolutely incredible. Yes, I definitely echo the silent applause in the chat. I think that the tools and the tips and the tactics that you've shared were immensely valuable. If anybody listening in was scribbling like crazy, taking notes, don't worry, we did record this. We will be sharing and posting the recording, as well as a recap of all of the incredible stuff shared here. We do have a couple of extra minutes. If anybody does want to do any last questions in the chat, anything like that, happy to answer them. And again, thank you so much for joining and taking the time today. Laying that for a minute.
There was a question that was posted in the Q&A. What about giving feedback? My students are younger and have had to rely more on written feedback. I'm just not sure it's hitting the same. And I know we kind of answered this in the chat a little bit. For me, we utilize a lot of Mote. We just recently started using that because it gives that verbal feedback. Or, and I am giving Dr. K a lot of credit here. One of my professors, she creates, and she's in the chat right now, so she can give more. She will actually just open up like a screencast of whatever screencast tool you have available, pull up your work and talk through it. But she doesn't just talk through it and give, you know, like the sandwich feedback. It's genuine feedback that's going to actually push you and help you continue growing towards that next lesson. She's even gone as far as saying, oh, and here's something, I want you to take this away for your next assignment because of X, Y, Z. So if you're able to pull up their work and walk through it that way, that's similar to as if you called a student up to your desk and you were talking to them specifically about your assignment or about their assignment. So those are two tools that I've used, but if anyone else has tools, I would love to hear about them too.
I do for sure. I was like, ooh, English teacher, I can answer that. I can do this one. So we've been doing a few things for ours. So one is that we really do think about what it means to be giving feedback, and that feedback needs to happen as a part of the process. And so it isn't that we're giving feedback at the end. So we have found that unless you're giving feedback throughout the writing, it isn't going to make an impact because a student doesn't find it necessary. If you do it at the end, then what's the point if we're not redoing this work or this assignment? So we're doing it, we do things in small chunks. Right now we're working on a larger research paper and we give feedback at every single piece of that research paper. The other thing that we like to do, and my children, my own 3 children in their elementary school, what they call it is writer's workshop. And so my daughter, she has to wait, like my middle daughter, she said, oh no, mommy, I have to wait until writer's workshop before I go on. And I said, oh, what's that? And so she has a certain day and a certain time, and that has calmed her. Like she knows that that's when she's going to sit with her teacher and get feedback. But sometimes that's a lot of students, I know, for us in high school to be able to manage. So one of the things that we started to do was, because we're project-based, we really work on what are the issues that we are seeing our students make. And so we start to categorize kind of the big components of the issues. And then we do a workshop model where we bring a certain number of students together to give feedback and do reworking, and they help each other. We also bring in student leaders into those conversations, people who maybe were great at that particular component in their writing, and they help to guide the discussion and give feedback. We highlighted leaders and we had them go into each breakout room in our space, and they were the ones providing feedback to the students as the first level of feedback and talking it through, and then they gave student feedback to each other. So for us, that has been the piece. When Becky was talking about like whoever is doing the talking is doing the learning, we have worked on making our students be those teachers in the space and really working on that. And then having different students be the teachers each time has really helped us as well. And then the teacher is also one of the voices in terms of that.
Thank you both. There's another question in the chat. I'll read it out if you didn't see it, and then I think we can take another minute or two here. The question is from Misha Jeminson asking, my school is using a learning center model for in-person AB schedules for students. Student learning is still primarily online via Canvas. How do we support teachers who don't have content knowledge for all subjects, but are tasked with monitoring student work completion in their pods. Matt, I know you answered this, but I don't know if you want to do it live, and then anybody else who wants to add on.
Yeah, sure. There's a number of ways to do it. I think that if it's like a learning center model, then if you have the ability to see your students screened, whether they're in person, in the learning center, at home, asynchronous, then that would be huge, because then you can provide them that direct message feedback. You can just see what they're doing. You can direct them to the right location if you need it. To me, that's probably one of the easiest ways to manage if you're looking for them to complete work that they've been assigned, and just to try and keep them accountable in that type of setting. Also, you can use an educational support tool like Paper, which is 24/7 tutoring with a instructor that has content knowledge in math, science, essay revision, pretty much every single subject that's available. That's a huge component as well. I also recommend using a resource like Khan Academy if the students need that additional enrichment or extension at times, or that intervention. So there's a number of routes that you can go with that learning center model. So I hope that helps answer your question. Does anyone else on the panel have any ideas?
I threw this in the chat, but one idea is if you could have a to-do list or like a checklist of the assignments, that might be helpful. But having that pod teacher focus more on student reflection and giving them questions that they could ask students to help students reflect in their own work. So it's not necessarily that they need to be an expert in all of the content areas, but instead they're helping students focus more on the reflection of the work that they're turning in and the work that they're completing. That might just give them a better pathway into understanding the students' thinking, where they're at, and if they've completed the work, but it does take it a step further.
All right. Well, thank you again so much, everyone. We hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, wherever you're dialing in from. And we'll see you at one of our next teacher roundtables in early April. Thank you again. Have a great evening. Thank you.